This week on To the Contrary.
First, women fueling the anti-Trump movement. Then, is it back to abstinence only for the Trump administration's teen pregnancy prevention strategy? And it's Boy Scouts versus Girl Scouts for new recruits.
I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the Trump presidency gender divide.
President Trump's actions in the past week have cost him a lot of support from women. A new Gallup poll finds only 29% of women, compared with 43% of men, approve of the president. The 14-point difference is one of the biggest gender gaps for a modern president this early in a first term. Quote, opposition to President Trump among women is solidifying, end quote, according to the research director for the Public Religion Research Institute that also released a survey asking about impeachment this week. It found 40% of Americans support impeachment, up 10 points since February. And the gender gap has widened considerably. Nearly half of women and 32% of men believe the president should be impeached. Among Democrats, the gender gap is even wider. 80% of women and 62% of men support impeachment. These poll numbers come out the same week debate over Trump's fitness for the job escalated. First, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper went public about his concern over Trump's access to nuclear codes. California Representative Jackie Speier came out saying there's a, quote, growing mountain of evidence that the president has been very erratic, has shown mental instability, end quote, and should be removed from office under the 25th Amendment.
So, Dr. Lara Brown, did all this talk this week about the president's fitness for office turn off more women than men?
Well, I think what we see is that it's a continuation of trends that have been there ever since President Trump was elected. I mean, there was an 11-point gender gap in the actual election results, and this is just a continuation of that.
I don't think women have been any more turned off than they probably already were by the president's behavior this past week. Women are used to being called crazy and lunatics, and that's why you don't see many women that disturbed by it. I think far more men are.
I think it's, Maya Angelou's quote, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. And we're now having to believe what Trump was saying in the campaign is the real deal.
Women, I think, were very affected by what they see in the news, but their opinions may shift again. So we'll see what happens in the future.
So first, let's talk first about the comments for fitness for office. Was this news to anybody? I mean, he did behave. I saw two major news organizations use the term unhinged for the first time to describe him after his speech in Phoenix. But he gave speeches like that during the campaign. So is this going to turn any support away from him?
I mean, I think if anything, we have to be really careful. I mean, the push for impeachment, it actually feeds his narrative of the media's out to get me, I can't win anything. And, the more we can really focus on policies and court to show that he's unhinged and he's not qualified, the better. But right now, especially as a girl growing up in South Carolina, it does feel like a full attack on him. And the reaction is going to be to defend, which is not the reaction we want at all.
But then why are women turning off to him, according to this poll right now?
Women may be getting turned off because of lack of legislative accomplishment. Let's look at it honestly. I mean, there were serious priorities he talked about on the trail. Have any been accomplished as yet? No, and he seems to shift the blame to Congress time and again. But I don't.
But how can you split the infinitive that Manal was just talking about?
Sure.
If indeed the reason he's not making any progress with Mitch McConnell is because he seems unhinged and he attacks the leadership in Congress of his own party. No president has ever done that before. You can't expect to work with these people if you're going to call them horrible names and tell them they're ineffective and incompetent and all the rest. And the only reason he's doing that is because there's something going on in his brain that's not normal.
Well, I don't know if there's anything going on in his brain. I would love to know, of course, but I think this is part of President Trump's personal strategy. This is a strategy I think he's used throughout his business career. He called people names on the campaign trail. Marco Rubio, a senator, Ted Cruz, a senator, and these people still supported him. So this isn't anything unusual. Yes, this past week we may have seen a day-by-day flip-flop, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. One day you know that the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, has written the speech, and he's got a teleprompter. The next day it's him in full force like he was on the campaign trail. So it's certainly unnerving, I think, for members of those of us who go on air and talk about the state of U.S. politics. We have never seen a day-by-day flip-flop like this, and also in the many months since he's become president, we have not seen it to this level. But I think this is who we know. This is who we know won, and I think his base wanted this person because he's not politically correct. He doesn't do things as usual, and so they're not, frankly, that surprised when he goes off and calls the Senate Majority Leader something. And there's also a new poll out showing that the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who's been called the most powerful man in Washington, there's a poll showing that he's losing support amongst Republicans. So to President Trump, it's working. This strategy is working.
I mean, let me just say two things. First, the institution of the presidency does not change the character of the individual who becomes president. That is a huge fallacy. People think that, you know, somebody who on the campaign trail might be somebody different once they're in the White House. That does not happen. The White House, if anything, magnifies their personality. And I think what you see right now are more Republicans coming to grips with that realization.
But do you think he's got a strategy here?
No.
Or is he just driven by whatever is going on with him mentally?
No, I do not believe that President Trump is strategic in his behavior. I believe that he is sort of absolutely engaged in his impulses. What makes sense to him at the moment is what he does. And that is a problem if you want to be successful in politics, because there are consequences all over the place.
And why would women want to support somebody like that when, you know, they can see that if a child of theirs were acting like this, they would take him to the psychiatrist or psychologist.
You know, and I think that I don't think you should. I don't want to go through this trying to decide if he's mentally ill or not. The American people have seen who he is for a long time, and I think when they hear that talk, they tune it out and say, "Yep, there you are, out to get him. You haven't liked him from the beginning, and you're saying the same thing that they said, that CNN said, that MSNBC said, and that all these elites said." And I don't think that actually helps the conversation. And why the American people wanted him was because of the policies. He promised very specific, he promised lower taxes, change in immigration status, change on health care. And I think the big problem is whether or not he's going to do that. And I agree that some of his style, which was so appealing to a lot of people, they're going to want the goods delivered. So that's the big challenge. He needs to make sure that he's not his own worst enemy, preventing that success, because a lot of people aren't going to care at the end of the day how many times he's insulted different people if he can get what he promised done.
But because of doing that, that's my question. How can he possibly get anything done?
We'll see.
If I were Mitch McConnell, I would hate him too.
They need to win too.
I know that his poll numbers
are worse than the
really
president's.
really low. I know that.
Yeah.
And he's not engaging. He doesn't have an engaging. He didn't host a TV reality show, and he doesn't have an engaging personality. He's a real legislator. But how can you split that factor out? To me, it doesn't make any sense.
He's a grown-up. I mean, they're going to have to. Congress has to learn to work with the White House, just like the White House, or else they're going to have big problems next year.
But I really worry, because I think those who oppose Trump, which I do, the questions, like those type of questions, are getting us stuck to where it becomes the center of the focus. And it's what lost us the elections. It's why we lost the campaign, is because we were so stunned. How is he getting the nomination? And he's got it. He has a base. He has support. I think he has strategy. And if we don't wake up, he will win another term, and we're still talking about impeachment.
But do you think his base, which seems to be stuck around 35% of Americans support him, do you think it will go down down there from there?
I'm
or
really
can it go up?
keen on learning from this last election, because for me it was my other 9/11. Like, it hit me in a punch in the stomach. So the other thing I've learned is not to trust the polls when it comes to Trump. And so I don't really pay attention to them.
But let me just say with this, I mean, I do agree that at the end of the day, that 35% could fall if those results are not there. I mean, I believe that a big part of why people supported President Trump was the idea that he could knock everything down and make something happen.
Create jobs.
And so if that sort of making things happen doesn't happen, I think the Republicans are in a world of trouble.
Unless we're feeding them the reason for why it's not happening.
Do you
That's
think
my
tax
fear.
reform is going to go for? I mean, he's pretty much. They may make an attempt again at health care, but for the moment, it's dead. Will they do taxes? Will they do immigration? There's a bill out there to cut by 2 Republican senators, Cotton and Perdue. And will those things get passed?
Well, we'll find out next month. It's going to be a whale of a month. But I think it'll tell us everything we need to know. Because, look, nothing has happened so far, and it's because of that reluctance to really do some kumbaya, right, between the White House and Congress. And now we just worry, is that kumbaya ever even going to happen? It was sort of nicely happening for optics, perhaps, for these many months. But right now, all the burden really rests on the shoulders of Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. So they're really going to have to make a decision in this very moment. At the time of this taping, at this very moment, I can tell you that there's a White House official who's told a CNBC reporter that the White House doesn't have a plan for tax reform, that they're looking to the Hill for this. So don't bother us anymore. We're looking to the Hill to lead. And I think that's really dangerous, because that means this White House hasn't got ideas and solutions, and they want to shift the blame. They want to continually shift the blame. And that's bad for the American public. That's not what I wanted as a Republican. I continue to oppose this president, but I had been hopeful that perhaps he had some ideas. Perhaps all these CEOs could have helped.
And I know that Carrie, that your organization is very steeped in the tax reform issue. What do you see coming out off the Hill?
I'm really optimistic. I think that there is reason for optimism. I think that there's a lot of people who really need to get this done, and I think that that's sometimes that can be really bring people together. So I don't consider it bad news if the Hill is taking the lead on this. That's what's supposed to happen. Frankly, it's supposed to legislation's supposed to come from the Hill, and if the White House gives them a wide enough parameters, doesn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, I think tax reform is a definite possibility.
But I submit to you, the base voted for him because they thought this is different. They thought, here's the CEO who has different ideas. All these people on the Hill right now are the usuals, they're the establishment.
Yeah,
right?
but delegating is one of the things that I think that they had hoped he could do. Nobody thought he was like an expert in tax law. So as long as they move forward and lower the rates, simplify it, I think it could be a big win.
I hope for Paul Ryan.
Will they need Democrats to go along with them, or will their majorities in both houses be enough?
We'll see. I think that's an open question. I don't think it's. I think the Democrats also do run a risk if they, nobody thinks that the tax code is good. The amount of time we waste complying with it, the way it makes our companies so much less competitive here in America. I think that it would actually really behoove Democrats to get on board.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnier Bay. From Trump's approval ratings to cuts in federal funding.
Teen pregnancy prevention programs in 39 states will lose federal funding 2 years before the grants were supposed to end. The Trump administration recently cut short funding that had already been awarded. The cuts amount to some $200 million. The program was created in 2010 under former President Barack Obama. While it was operating, teen pregnancy rates dropped by 55% compared with the early 1990s. It also cut teen abortion rates by a third. The government was funding groups that work to reduce and prevent teen pregnancy with a focus on reaching populations where teen pregnancy rates are high. A spokesman for Health and Human Services said the program was cut short because there's little evidence of positive impact. Critics believe this may signal that the Trump administration wants to shift its focus to abstinence-only sex education.
Carrie, earlier in the show you talked about common ground. Why is this continuing battle over abstinence only versus real sex education going on?
Well, I think that, first of all, I don't think that there's been any indication that they're going to be reallocating this money towards abstinence only. I think that's just something we're throwing out there as a possibility. But what this is about is budget cuts. And you might think that there's other places to cut the budgets, but there's a lot of people out there who say we are in a nation tremendously in debt. We need to start doing this. I don't know why this is a federal government program when this is something the states can do. And also, I think that the whole premise of this, we're talking about this idea that, we're throwing out these numbers from 1990 until today. There's been this tremendous drop in teen pregnancy, and then somehow saying it's because of these programs. I think that there's very little to suggest that. There's a lot of, the Brookings Institute did a study showing the other factors that were affecting this. Things like, and they credit things like the MTV's, 16 and Pregnant, as having the greatest impact, and then on the economy. So I think it's a really big leap among critics to say, this is gonna, if we take away this funding, we're gonna reverse this progress. There's a lot of else going on here.
Your thoughts, Laura?
Well, I mean, I do think that we have seen that there's a lot of complexity in understanding teen pregnancy. I mean, one of the other factors that did come up is that young people are actually having less sex than other previous generations. So there are, I think, a lot of factors and really welcome news in the fact that teen pregnancy is lower than it has been in recent years. And I don't know at the margins how much this is mattering. I mean, we're talking about, $100 million, and that is not a substantial amount to affect a substantial number. So whether that is, in fact, changing things, I don't know. I am somebody who believes in sex education. I believe that it should be widely available, but I also agree that I'm not sure that it is something that the federal government should be doing.
I'm all over the place. Let's put it that way. I'm a millennial, so what was expected. I just really believe in going back to the family. Sex ed is best coming from parents, or a parent saying a sibling should do it. I just really believe in the family having a lot to do with preventing teen pregnancies. I think if there's a strong family life, if there's some good cues about just what's ahead for girls, and women. As a young woman, if you have opportunity and hope ahead of you, that there's school coming, there's a great job coming, there's a great person coming for you, that's going to value your virginity, or maybe lack of virginity, who knows? The fact that you have saved this pregnancy for later in life, when you are more established and able to take care of a child by all conventions, I think it all comes from the home. It stems from home life, and I just really believe that the government should take a bit of a backseat. I do believe in resources being available to those who perhaps don't have a strong family life and a strong safety net. But I just really don't think we should put all the focus on government. That's just where I am on it. I don't know.
I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're talking about government involvement. But as you know, I'm studying to be a sex coach, and the reason why I'm launching the business Across Red Lines is because I saw a direct tie between women's sexuality and leadership and conflict prevention. So I think where I worry about this conversation is we're looking at sex education just as preventing teenage pregnancy, when it's actually about empowerment. And when people actually have access to really understanding their sexuality, especially from a young age, it can be turned into a source of power. And so that's what worries me, is when we're just talking about it from the lens of preventing teenage pregnancy, or we're talking about it, we're actually losing the power that comes from sex education, which I don't think we're getting enough of.
That's a fabulous point. And how many parents are capable of conveying that when they teach their children about?
So I'll speak about within the Muslim community. When I started running focus groups with older women, almost all the older women were saying, we don't want to be mentors for the young women, we want to sign up for your course. And so I think that's where you'll actually find a lot of common ground between the generations. I think both the youth and the older generation would actually welcome proper sex education, again, from an empowerment lens, not just from a reproductive lens, which I think we've done a huge disservice.
Tell us a little more about what you mean by from an empowerment lens.
So I see, particularly if I look at it from the feminine and women's sexuality, it's literally a compass. That's how you build your intuition, not necessarily having sex, but understanding your sexuality sexual energy, understanding the power from sexuality, and particularly I think women, it's literally how you build your intuition. It's a built-in GPS system. So when our societies teach you to repress, and if you look at, I got a double whammy, both from the Muslim and Arab context and growing up from the South from the Puritan context. So I got both ends, right? And what we're taught is sacrifice, and what we're taught, and basically what you do is you shut down your feelings, you shut down your GPS system. And so what I train women to do is get back in touch with that, with the sensual, with the smell, with the sexual. Again, it doesn't mean that you're having sex. You can still be abstinent, but really get in touch with your sexual energy, and you turn on this GPS system that will guide you through life.
All right, good luck with that.
Thank you.
That launch, that business launch. From teen pregnancy programs to girls versus Boy Scouts.
Should girls be able to join the Boy Scouts? One might see it as a sign of equality, but the Girl Scouts officials don't feel that way. They charge the Boy Scouts are exploring that prospect surreptitiously. Membership in both scouting organizations has taken a hit during the past decade, but the Boy Scouts said in a statement to the Washington Post, considering including girls is not about boosting their numbers. It's in response to families saying they want their daughters in the same organization as their sons. Some women not involved with the Girl Scouts have actually been actively lobbying the Boy Scouts to include girls.
So, is it a good idea to make it into one organization?
I love this idea. I grew up with a brother who was in the Boy Scouts, and we didn't have a strong Girl Scouts organization in my community, and so I wasn't part of it. I just kept on with my other side activities while my brother got to do those side activities, and then go to Boy Scouts on top of it. And I think as siblings, and just as a gal who loved everything about scouting, I was drawn to it. I would have loved to have been a part of it. So I think this is really cool on a number of levels. Just the superficial. Brothers and sisters get to learn these great principles together. I love it.
I think, though, that there's there's absolutely room for an organization like that. I think it's a great idea to have a scouting community that would be for both sexes. But I do think that there's something valuable. I think we've kind of lost in this this idea of having boys be among other boys. That we recognize much more that there's need for women to sometimes just be around women, and I think that's a valuable community, and we women know we get a lot from not having the distraction of men around. I think the same is true for boys, and we have to allow there to be spaces, because just as men's colleges are essentially going the way of the dodo, I worry about this idea of kind of moving of killing off the Boy Scouts or making it just another thing that boys and girls are doing together.
I actually have some personal experience in this area, because several months ago, I was invited to the local chapter annual dinner of the Girl Scouts, and so they put on a big show with because I guess the audience was mainly full of funders, and the empowerment message that was given there, and the focus on how girls and their preteen girls and teenage girls especially start to lose self-esteem and trying to build that back in. That's just not something that would happen in a co-ed organization. So, or for sure, it wouldn't happen in the Boy Scouts. Yeah. So, is that something that shouldn't be lost?
I mean, absolutely. I am very passionate about a lot of things, but especially about protecting women's space. I think it's really important for a lot of the reasons that you described, for both genders. I think that we have to be creative to think about how we incorporate LGBTQ and transgender. We shouldn't ignore that element of it, but actually offering protected space is essential, and it really allows for people, again, to step into their own individual power. So when I read that, I really worry about what will be lost.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think one of the things that's so interesting about women and their development, when they are young girls, many of them do aspire to be politicians and in fact be president of the United States. And by the time they have essentially completed high school, they see themselves as it's not for them. So I do think, and we do talk a lot in political science about the ambition gap among women, and it really is this sort of need to be accepted by other men. And so I worry that if there isn't
Is that all? Is that what it's about?
Well, a lot of it does have to do with women, when they are young, tend to make decisions and behave in ways that they believe men will approve of. So they call it the male gaze, and there is a lot of actually academic focus on it, where even when there aren't men in the room, women seem to imagine what a man would say about their behavior. And this is one of the sort of reasons why there's a very famous quote about the fact that women are the only constituency or demographic that gets more radical with age.
And I'm somebody who's been slut shamed. I've been a victim of slut shaming. I've exited girls groups for that very reason. I don't like going to groups of girls because I find them very vicious. I found that really true in my adolescent years. And I think I'm a really strong hear me roar type of woman.
But you have a lot, but you do a lot with women.
Because I kind of feel like I should now, because I'm also much older, but that's because I also believe in the greater good too. But when I was much younger, I stayed away from girls because I was always different than other girls. And I liked kind of hanging out with guys, and I wanted to do some things that guys did. I wanted to go to karate with my brother, but my brother didn't want to come to gymnastics after a while with me anymore. And so different things happen, and I mean, I understand protected spaces, but sometimes women's groups, I think at certain ages, are more detrimental to psyches.
All right, interesting. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. And Manal, go ahead and finish because we're still, you said I think.
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the times in patriarchy we have to be careful of, because they try, like, the final dynamic of power is when you get people to police each other. And women are definitely guilty of that. I would say minorities do that a lot to each other, where we police each other. But I love this quote by a poet that says, men are so lazy